In reference to the checking of his watch, that didn't happen just once. That happened on every single one that came out of that airplane. It happened on every single one of them. They would release the salute, and he looked down at his watch on every last one, all 13. He looked down at his watch.
Joining me now, William Ruger, PhD, Afghanistan vet. He's a Navy Reserve officer, president of the American Institute for Economic Research. That was Darren Hoover there in that video, father of fallen Marine Staff Sergeant Taylor Hoover. Okay, William, they don't act like they care. They've never acted like they cared. I don't know if cold or horrible is a way to describe that. I don't know what best way to describe it is, but from the press conference statements to the accounts of the parents when they met them, no one in this administration seems to give a crap.
Well, look, this was a problem for the length of this forever war, if you will, right? I mean, for 2 decades, Afghanistan was kind of forgotten by many. And then when it was paid attention to, we had that uplift in the Obama administration, but very soon thereafter, it kind of fell off the map. And, that's been a real problem with these wars in the Middle East, is there really a buy-in for this type of approach to American foreign policy there? And I think you ultimately saw that there just wasn't that much concern. And of course, we see who pays the price, right? American men and women in uniform are the ones that have paid the price. And the question is, are we honoring them enough for that sacrifice that they made? And I think that ultimately we did the right thing there by withdrawing and getting out of this forever war. But it's really sad that it took that long for us to realize that we had largely accomplished most of our goals there. And the ones that we did not accomplish were ones that weren't really consistent with the national interest. So all in all, it's a very depressing scene in many ways, not just what happened at Abbey Gate, but what happened throughout the 20 years of this conflict.
How do we get to this place where our foreign policy has oftentimes, it seemed many times, especially over the decades, involves getting in a conflict where young men die with no clear objective? Historically, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life, and yet that's American foreign policy. We'll get involved, young men can die, and there's never a clear objective. Just go die for a while, maybe something vague like hearts and minds, but other than that, good luck, fellas.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem with an ideological approach to foreign policy, one that is focused on ideals that are really hard and slippery to get your hands around, as opposed to kind of the kind of real tangible issues of national interest, the kind of irreducible national interests of your safety, your economic prosperity, the American way of life here at home, right? Those are things that you can wrap your arms around. Those are the things that you can understand why people would go fight and potentially make the ultimate sacrifice for. But when you've expanded those war aims, like we did in Afghanistan, well beyond those vital national interests, then again, it gets slippery, right? Because lots of different interest groups, especially when you're involving lots of different countries, we had over 40 countries involved in the ISAF campaign there. Everybody's got a little bit of a different answer to that. Different Americans had different views about why we were there. Was it to build girls' schools in Helmand? Was it to promote a campaign against al-Qaeda? Was it to rebuild that country in our image? Was it something that even mattered very much, especially after the Iraq war started and we turned our attention? Again, just a terrible approach. And really, I think an approach in Afghanistan that shows you the problems of American foreign policy writ large, right? We have not focused on our vital national interests. That has not been the focus of American foreign policy. Instead, we've had these goals of what we might call primacy, which is not very tangible, but this idea that the America has to remain dominant in all of the major parts of the world. But what does that actually mean? What are we willing to spend blood and treasure for? And then also these ideological goals of democracy promotion by the bayonet that we saw in place after place. And these have all led to failures, right? If you think about the Iraq war, the ultimate failure of the last 30 years of American foreign policy, right? 4,000 Americans dead, tens of thousands wounded, trillions of dollars spent, and for what? Afghanistan, similar. Again, not the original project in Afghanistan, but the nation building project. Then you have Libya, which is an underrated problem in American foreign policy, right? Where you had arms flowed out, terrorists flowed in, you had a civil war in the country, you had destabilization of areas around it, like Mali, and then a refugee crisis that led to destabilization in Europe due to hundreds of thousands of refugees going into Europe. So, just so many own goals. Syria, right? That's another one. Oftentimes ill-defined projects that we throw soldiers and airmen and Marines and sailors at, but oftentimes ill-defined. I mean, look at our Syria project. Are we there to help protect Kurds? Are we there to promote the future of regime change against Assad? Are we there for ISIS? Right? All of these things coming together, no one really understanding what we're going to do when we leave, what our exit strategy is. And Colin Powell told us, 30 years ago, you got to have an exit plan, right? That's how you make sure that you don't get bogged down in these forever wars. But again, it's all about this very ideological primacist agenda that we're seeing that is very much in contrast to an America First approach that looks at America's vital interests and then makes trade-offs and where we could tell soldiers, hey, this is why you're going downrange, this is what you're fighting for. And it makes sense if your parents get a letter someday that it meant something for your country.
William, what do we make of the drastic increase in suicide? Study came out today. Veteran suicide has soared tenfold in the last 15 years. That is so awful on so many levels. In what ways, I'm sure there's more than one, are we failing the men and women who go fight for this place?
Yeah, I mean, it's terrible to see this, to see people come back from overseas or see them come, end their lives when they're in service to their country. It's just a terrible tragedy. And I'm not sure what we can do, right? The military puts a lot of resources into trying to protect the mental health of its veterans. I know that when I came back from Afghanistan, I was there in 2008, 2009, and we had to transit back through Kuwait to go through some of this kind of post-deployment training to make sure that we had resources available to us, to make sure that people who had issues, particularly those who faced combat, that they had some of those resources. But once they get back to the U.S., into their lives and their communities, particularly for people who transit out of active duty or who are reservists, they may not have the support around them that they need. I guess the message is that if you're a veteran and you're struggling with mental health issues, get help. Talk to your fellow soldiers, airmen, Marines, sailors. Don't just keep it bottled up. I think what our country needs to tell them, what I'll tell them right here, is that we value you. We value what you did. Even when we were let down by civilian leaders and even military leaders at the Pentagon, that you did your duty. You did the best that you can do, and that we honor that. I always put the challenge to our civilian leaders when they get us into these wars that oftentimes have these deleterious effects on the home front, not just abroad. That's why we have to make sure that we're only fighting wars that are absolutely necessary, because these things have just terrible consequences. My grandfather was a veteran of World War II. He fought in the Battle of the Bulge. He was wounded and was in a POW camp. And, people struggle with those experiences. And, I think that we're putting more effort into that than back in my grandfather's day to try to deal with some of these problems. But, they're still terrible. War is hell, as kind of famous saying goes. And again, that's why we have to have a restrained approach to foreign policy, right? Do what we have to defend our national interests, but don't go well beyond that in a way that actually undermines our safety and undermines our security here at home, and puts a grave, I think, cost on these people who come home after fighting these. And again, the issue of the returning warrior has been one that is as old as literature itself. It goes all the way back to Odysseus and Homer, right? And in an early part of my career, I did a fair amount of research on this, about how combat and military service affects things like marriages, how it affects communities. There's lots of research out there. on how it affects these individual soldiers and the warriors that we send to war. And a lot of that research shows just how costly it can be. And so it needs to be part of our cost benefit analysis when we decide to go to war, because, think of all those veterans that are coming home and facing these problems. Let's not just think about the schools we've built abroad or the fact that we can claim a kind of an initial success like you saw after the Iraq War, and then it peters out.
Yeah. William, thank you so much. That was awesome. Come back soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
I have great news. If you enjoyed that, I have a YouTube channel you can subscribe to. Whatever I do, it'll be right there on YouTube. So go subscribe today.